It's another edition of the Church Solutions Podcast. My name is Phil Thompson.
And I'm Steve Lacy.
Steve, how are you today?
Doing just peachy.
All right, good deal.
Getting ready to head to San Diego, your favorite place.
One of my favorite places.
Two of my kids are playing on a national, they made it to nationals with Ultimate Frisbee.
Ultimate Frisbee. Ultimate Frisbee. Yeah. That's the ultimate. Okay. That's interesting. If I was their age, I probably would have done that. I used to love playing Frisbee. But
yeah,
San Diego.
A lot of running.
San Diego's a great place. Yeah, I guess you do. I've seen a little bit of it. Yeah. Well, I wanted to throw this out. It's a little unusual, but I wanted to throw this out. If people could pray for my son, his name is Graydon. He is in the hospital with COVID-19, complications with COVID-19 too. And he was in and then he got out and he went back in. He's got fluid on his lungs. And they did do a procedure yesterday to actually put a tube in him to drain the fluid. And so people could pray for Graydon. I would really appreciate it. It's very difficult for him and obviously for parents, as we are, because it's out of our control. And that's when anxiety hits, is when you can't control something. So I appreciate that. Hey, this podcast is brought to you by mychurchdaily.com. mychurchdaily.com gives you the ability to provide flash briefings on Alexa devices, Amazon Echo devices, and you can connect with your people through uploading files using mychurchdaily.com. Check it out. That's our website, mychurchdaily.com. And a little spoiler, that's actually us. We actually have, we created this. And so check it out. All right, Steve, let's get to our guest today. We've had him on. We're just checking the records here. We had, this is episode 310, I think, or 311, but we had James Wasem on back in April of 2017. James, how are you?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me on again.
James, did I pronounce your last name correctly?
You did. It's James Wasem.
Okay, good. So James, in case you don't know, James is actually somebody that's been spending over 20 years performing in bands. He's a drummer. He's done mixing live sound for churches and schools and theaters, works with audio systems and installers, designers. And his one of his purposes is to help people use audio and video technology. He's written many books, many of them. The last one is The Great Church Sound, the second edition. Did I get that right, James?
Yeah, that's right. Second edition came out in late 2019, I believe.
All right, yeah, and that's available on Amazon. He's also a blogger, and he's the co-founder and CEO of I want to say G.me, but it's Gigi, right?
Gigi, yeah.
Dude, right. Get with it.
I know a Gigi. And so I always get that mixed up, but and that's actually a web service to help to create that you created, James, to help people stream their own live events, mainly musicians, and so James, it's good. You hail from Missoula, Montana.
Yeah, it's one of the towns in Montana where people outnumber the sheep and cows, but the rest of the state, not so much.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's a beautiful area. I've been there years ago, and we were talking off video earlier that I guess Steve is heading that direction, or in that general direction.
Yes. And I have a brother in Montana, but 7 hours from you. So I would have really not expected that.
All right. No. Okay. So I wanted to have James on today because, with the pandemic that we're still in, we do streaming video. We're streamingchurch.tv, as among other things. And we've had a lot of churches come to us for streaming. And one of the most important things when it comes to streaming video is really not video. It's actually audio. At least that's my take. And so we've had a lot of people asking, how to get good audio. And we thought, let's have James on because he's an expert at that. So James, we're going to ask you a lot of questions here, but one of them is, I'll just kick this off and Steve will pipe in here, I'm sure. If I'm a smaller size church and I haven't been doing streaming video that long, what's the simplest way to get decent audio into my live streaming video? That's the first question.
Yeah, well, a lot of small churches are still running analog consoles. I say still, I don't mean that disparagingly. I love analog consoles. I think there's a lot of utility to them. So more power to you if you're still using analog. But the challenge with analog is that you don't have a lot of submix availability necessarily. You might have some aux groups and things like that you can use. But it can be a little bit cumbersome to create a separate live streaming mix from one console. So a lot of small churches and even medium-sized churches will take the main output of the console, whether that's the main out from the left-right mix or the main out from an aux group. But you take that and put it into a camera or a computer, whatever device you're encoding on and streaming with. And a lot of people will just call it good at that and then depend on the encoder to work out all the magic, which works to a point. The problem is the more complicated your mix, the more complicated it's going to be to get it to sound good if you're just sending that straight mix to the encoder or the camera. So what I always like to do is, even if it's analog, you add a compressor to the mix and you compress that main stereo output mix or whatever it is you're sending there. Even if it's a set of ambient microphones in the room, you're compressing that mix enough so that the dynamic range is controlled for the end user, for the listener. One of the most distracting things, especially on mobile devices, when I'm listening to a live stream, is that the volume of a worship service can go from really quiet to really loud in a matter of just a few seconds, especially between announcements and music playing. That's a big one. So the announcements can be really quiet, and then all of a sudden the music comes in and it just blows my ears out. So a compressor helps tame that dynamic range. And you can use a relatively inexpensive outboard compressor. Or if you're going through certain types of software on a computer or something, I know even free software like OBS Live will help with this. You can add a compressor to the input audio channel. And by doing that, you're able to control that input. And there's different ways you can use those plugins. But even with free software, there are ways to add a compressor to that mix. And that's probably the first extra fancy stuff that I would do before even trying to create a submix on a console.
So isn't I'm not an AV guy. I guess I'm a video guy. I do the video switching thing, but I'm not an audio guy by any means. But I do hang around a bunch of audio guys. So
So
reminds me of a joke about drummers, right? Or
I was worried about where you're going with that. I'm a drummer.
I can't remember the joke, but I know it was funny, but about the drummer one. But anyway, so I'm that guy that doesn't know the audio, but I hang around the audio guys, and I get that. My main mix, there's going to be a guy, and he's going to be mixing on a board for the house. And the house is got walls and reverb. And so there's a bunch of bass and stuff that you hear in the house. So the guy's probably dialing that down a little bit for the house. And then they're taking that sound and passing it over to OBS or whatever I'm streaming with, or I buy equipment, a mixer, an analog mixer in between the two. So if I'm adding a compressor, I'm thinking, that's going to clip the top and the bottom, right? Or do I not understand how compressors work?
It basically squashes the signal. Think of it like a vice, or it brings the ceiling down, and it allows everything to come within a certain range. So this stuff that's fluttering around up here gets squashed down and can only do this. So it really helps tighten things up a lot, and it'll make your mix just more focused in a lot of ways. And it helps the end user not have to deal with those quiet to loud peaks. It squashes everything.
Okay. So we have a lot of churches that are using OBS, or I assume the same kind of capabilities with vMix or Wirecast, or they'll have a an ability to apply a compressor into the mix. So is it, I know my way around a little bit within OBS, but what do I look for? Where do I point me in the general direction so I know what to turn on and that sort of thing?
So it's different software would call it different things. I think in Wirecast it's called dynamics. So you go to the dynamics menu and you pull in a compressor, or you look for compression, either dynamics or compression. Compressors work on the dynamic range, so that's a good way to remember that. So you pull up your compressor, and you might be intimidated by some of the settings depending on how it's displayed on your screen, but there's 3 or 4 main settings to think about. One is your ratio. And the ratio is basically how much compression are you going to apply once the volume gets to a certain loudness. Once it gets to a certain volume, I'm going to crush it this much or this much. I mean, how am I going to hit that? So as a rule, like if I'm doing vocal compression, I might do a 2-to-1, 3-to-1, or maybe even a 4-to-1 compression ratio. But for live streaming, if you're doing it on the main output, you can actually get by with doing even a 10-to-1 compression ratio on that main output. Now that's a pretty high ratio. I know people that if you only use one compressor, some of them basically turn it into a limiter. So you're doing 20-to-1 or infinity-to-1 would be a true limiter, but you crank that ratio up and then you just hit the threshold. That's the second setting you want to pay attention to. Your threshold dials in where on that signal level you start to compress. So if your signal level is really loud, I dial in the compression threshold to hit it just below that loudest part, or as much as I want below that to crush that signal. So the compressor doesn't kick in until that threshold is set appropriately. So, and that I can't give you a setting for that. That's going to vary depending on any of your sound system components and how loud you're running and what that signal is calibrated for. I can't tell you it's a threshold of minus 10 dB or whatever it is. You're just going to have to dial it down until that compression starts to kick in. Now, what a lot of compressor plugins will have is what's called a gain reduction meter. And that's really a key. If you have access to that, you turn the threshold to the point where you get enough gain reduction, where it's about, I'd say 3 to 6 dB. About 6 dB of gain reduction is pretty good. That means you're crushing that signal, so to speak. You're compressing it and you're cutting it 6 dB at its loudest points. And that basically keeps it musical so that you're not getting this pulsing sound with the compression where it engages and then lets up, engages and lets up with that change, but it's enough that it's controlled. And so though that's kind of the main thing you want to look for. Set your compressor somewhere around a 4-to-1 ratio, adjust your threshold so that you can start to see some gain reduction of about, let's say, minus 6 dB. And then you can have what's called a knob called makeup gain, because anytime you put an effect in your mix, it's going to attenuate or lower the volume level of that signal. It's just fundamentally how it works. When you apply an effect, it's going to add resistance to that signal, so to speak, and it lowers the volume. So you might want to turn that up just a little bit. And that allows you, if you limit the signal and then you turn all of that signal up, that means you've basically, it's kind of like a mastering trick in recording, but you basically raise the volume of the entire signal level up. So you compress it and then raise it with makeup gain.
So along those lines, I have the benefit of dropping in on a bunch of different services on a Sunday. So we have a listing of everybody to stream in, and I can drop in. And I've also seen this on, I watch a web program or a cable program that's CNET. You've heard of CNET before? And there's a bunch, it's just a compilation of a bunch of videos, and it's a bunch of authors and editors that do their own videos. And even them, they'll come in and one guy will be really loud, just blowing my TV out. And then the next guy comes in, I can't hear anything, and on his other video. And I see that with the churches too. I'll drop in on a service and they're just like, whoa, let's turn that down a little bit. And then others where I can't hear anything and I'm having to turn it all the way up. Is there a way to fix the level, just the overall level, so that I know whether it's people can hear it or if it's too loud?
Yeah, that's actually a really common problem. And it's something even the pros spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to get right. So let's say you're broadcasting to, it doesn't matter which streaming service or platform, but your ingest server, the whoever's capturing that stream, and because it's all digital, there's a cap. If you exceed that cap, it's either going to automatically be throttled down and dealt with, or it's going to clip out and it's going to cause a lot of nasty distortion and all kinds of stuff. So my rule of thumb is to send a signal that's approximately about -6 dB. So 0 dB on digital scale, full scale, is as high as you get. Once you get to 0 dB, you start clipping the signal. So I shoot for sending my signal and turning that makeup gain on the compressor on my master bus so that the output doesn't really get much higher than -6 to -3 at the most. That way I know that I've compressed my signal and then I've raised it so that it's hitting that level fairly consistently. So if you're between, and it depends on the dynamics of your song, the material you're putting out, but if I'm sending a stream with the dynamic range somewhere between -15 and -6, that's going to be a pretty reasonable listening experience for someone. Some people send their stream out and it's at -20. And you just got to deal with it. It's very low level. It might be good quality sounding, but you got to turn the volume up on your device to even hear it. So that's what I shoot for.
I usually do -9, -8 or -9 for these podcasts is usually what I do. Mm-hmm. Does that reasonable?
Yeah. And the reason why a lot of people don't want to do more than -6, like if you do -3, you're technically still safe and okay. But if you do -6, what happens is if you combine the left and right channel, if you combine a -6 left channel with a -6 right channel, you get a -3 mono channel. So that's why if you keep it at, say, like in your case, if you keep a stereo mix at -9, you're in great shape because your mono mix, if somebody's listening on that type of a device, is now at -5 or something. So.
Steve, make a note of that next time you criticize me on my audio mixing.
Okay. We'll have to rewatch this. So being the noob, the VU meters are going from green, yellow, red, right? Is the red for most software systems or whatever, is it set to -2 dB or something where it starts turning red, or so I kind of watch the signal and go, oh, let's get it baby bouncing into the bottom of the red.
Yeah.
So where do those levels?
It depends on the device and the meter that's being used. But as a rule, if let's say you've got 2 or 3 segments of red, you could probably safely hit the first segment of red on that. Some digital scale meters don't hit red until you clip. So you do want to know what your meter is calibrated for. But yeah, I think a healthy yellow is fair to shoot for if you want to go more color coded. I think you get out of the green, you get into the yellow, and as long as you don't climb too far out of the yellow, you're probably at a fairly reasonable signal that you can work with.
Yeah, I got a quick question about compressors real fast, not to get us off track again, but what if I've got a live encoder like a Teradek or a Pearl Mini? So I probably need to get a hardware device, a hardware compressor.
Yeah, if you're not able to apply that with software, like a lot of these encoders don't necessarily have the whistles and bells with all those software tools in them. Yeah, you could get an outboard compressor between your console or the main output of whatever you're sending. Okay. And bring that into the encoder. So one compressor I've used, it's actually a real cheap and easy way to do it. Small form factor is the Rolls compressor. I can't remember the exact model number. It's like a 64S or something like that. But Rolls Audio makes a compressor, and it's a very small format, and that can work quite well. It does require external power. Most of these compressors will, so you do have to have your power requirements set accordingly. I'm a big fan of the easy peasy DBX compressors, whether you're stereo or mono. You can use a 266 or something like that. Use a nice compressor from DBX and plug that in. It actually works really well. I've had good success with those, and they're not super expensive.
So that was what's a typical cost?
You're running between $100 and $200.
Okay.
The Rolls compressor you can get for, I think, just under 100 or right at that range. And then I think DBX makes one, ART, PreSonus, a lot of these different audio brands make them, and you can find them at music stores or at your favorite online music shop. So they're pretty easy to come by. You just want to pay attention to, when you're sending the signal in, that you're coming out of whatever main mix or your aux mix out, and you're coming in with the right cable type, whether that's 1/4 inch or XLR. Make sure that you got the right cables for that. And then that you're coming out of that compressor with the right adapter that goes into your encoder. A lot of these encoders use a 3.5 millimeter jack, stereo unbalanced input. So you want to make sure and get the right cables that connect from your compressor to the encoder. That's where a lot of people can get tripped up. They're like, I got this great compressor, but now I got to buy a $10 cable for it. So not a big deal, just something to pay attention to.
So the next thing is, I kind of alluded to it, is, mixing for the house and mixing for streaming are different. What are some of the challenges on the streaming side, or what are some of the things that I need to look for the streaming mix?
Yeah, you talked about this with your reverb comment for sure. I mean, that's a big deal. So the compression is kind of my go-to thing. That's the one thing that can, take your mix from, so-so to actually pretty decent. The next thing is going to be, besides the actual quality of your mix, right? I mean, that's sort of, a given at this point. You need to have a decent sounding mix in your headphones. But the next thing to add that extra level of depth and quality is going to be adding reverb, a sense of presence, like I'm in the room with you. And where this really comes to light and can be an issue is with vocals. Instruments, not as big of a deal. That's a guitar. Guitar sounds good. Even if it's dry, all right, sounds good. A dry vocal, you better hope the singer isn't listening into your live stream, because they're going to think that they sound terrible, because there's no reverb. There's not even any room tone on their vocal that you would get in the natural room. So if you have the ability to do so on your console or with software, apply some reverb to that if you can. And just a little bit will help, especially on the vocals. You could apply it to the main output if you wanted to, but primarily you're really looking for some vocal reverb to help kind of give them some space. And you don't want too much. The trick with reverb is, typically you can use either a medium-sized room preset or a medium or large hall, and adjust that delay just a little bit so that you kind of get the size of that room dialed in the way you like it. And then turn that reverb up in the mix just to the point that you can hear it, and then back it off. It shouldn't be obvious that I've got reverb on this track. Listen how cool this is, right? No, I shouldn't be able to really hear it. So you want to turn it up and then turn it back down just a bit. And that should give some life to the mix and some space that is otherwise lacking in a lot of church live streams.
What about the role of like choir mics out in the audience or other places for that? Is that...
Yeah, this
Ambient.
is actually, there's a number of facets to that. That's, I was going to mention that's sort of a poor man's reverb in a way. If you've already got ambient microphones that you're using to capture the sound of the room. Or if you have an in-ear monitor system and you're using ambient mics to help feed some presence back into the in-ear monitor system, which if you don't do that, you should consider experimenting with that too. But those mics can do double duty, and you can actually bring that room tone into your live stream mix by using ambient microphones. Now, you do have to be careful with that, because if you've got ambient mics and you're mixing the live stream all on the same console, you want to make sure you're not feeding your ambient mics back into the main loudspeakers, because that's going to create a feedback loop. So you want to make sure if you do have ambient mics, they're solely used for whatever mix bus you're using for monitors, recording, and live streaming. But that is a great way to enhance the quality of the sound. And recording artists have used this trick for decades. When you, especially drums, you record drums and you stick an ambient mic in the room, and you get that extra tone that comes through in that development. You get enough delay off of the position of that ambient mic. It adds its own space to the mix, and it widens things up a bit. So it's a really nice tool to use for live streaming.
I've always found with doing, I actually did lead singing for a while too, so I can relate to the reverb thing on my vocals. But I've also found as a public speaker, I tend to mix in a lot of humor, comedy in what I'm doing, and when people can hear the reaction of the audience or the congregation, hear them laugh, hear their reaction, it just adds to the presentation so much.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that a lot of churches, when they switched during the pandemic to go to live streaming only, we really lost a lot of that community feel, that communal worship vibe. And that was one of the big reasons why, is because there was no room, or, at first everybody's doing it from their living room. But now that we've got more of a hybrid environment again in a lot of places, it's important to focus on that. And I've even attended churches where they've had satellite locations, and you're broadcasting the message to these satellite locations. That's live streaming, just by a different name. And if you don't have some of that, room element in there with that primary attending, congregation there, you really do lose part of the experience. And you can add a fair amount of that back in there with ambient mics.
So the next question here is, and we may have covered this 4 years ago, but it's worthy revisiting, is I'm going to have people watching on TV with a great sound system at home. I'm going to have people on their cell phones in a car, listening to it. I'm going to have people on computers with crummy, built-in speakers. Do I choose a device or a place, or do I just tune for the guy with the best sound equipment, or what's going on there? What do you recommend?
Yeah, that's a really good question. This is also used in recording studios as well. When you do a main mix, you want to listen to it on as many different types of speakers as you can. But if your final mix doesn't sound reasonably okay on the crappiest speaker you can find, which is probably a cell phone speaker or something like that, then you need to revisit the mix. I should be able to hear and understand what the pastor is saying. I should be able to pick out the lead vocal. It shouldn't be overwhelming, but I should be able to hear all of that just a little above the worship music, depending on the style of worship you have. And I should be able to hum along with the tune. It shouldn't be distorted. I shouldn't have instruments getting completely blown away in the mix. Certainly shouldn't have the drums overpowering the rhythm instrument section and all of that. So you want to mix for that device, because, and that is a lot of phones are still mono audio output. So you need to make sure your mix sounds good on that type of a device, and then tweak it a little bit, and you can mix. By and large, you can actually get a really good quality mix on these larger sound systems by mixing for, the lowest quality device within reason. Now, I always caution people when you're mixing for live streaming, don't just sort of fake it and make it up as you go along. I mean, you can do that at first, but always check the device, do some sound checks if you can, but monitor that live stream, monitor it on multiple devices. I mean, we're used to sitting and if you have the luxury of having a secondary console or a workstation where you're mixing your live stream, a lot of people just listen to those speakers and be like, yep, sounds good. I'm in the basement of the church. Live stream sounds great. The green light's on. But they failed to say, oh, well, what does the feedback monitor say to me? What is that, sound quality through earbuds, through headphones, through speakers, through the phone speakers, through the car radio? Go out and listen, streaming through your car. I mean, that's if you have a congregation that's listening in those environments, test it out. Now, the next thing that comes down to mixing for those devices, and some people make this mistake, is putting too much bass into the mix. And that will be a problem primarily with your higher quality systems because they can reproduce that bass, whereas a phone speaker can't. But I tend to keep the mixes, pretty much out of that low end spectrum. I'll even put a filter on there and wipe out the frequencies below, say, even 60 hertz or something like that. Because a lot of the content going out doesn't necessarily get even reproduced. So it just adds to the clutter of that mix. So you can experiment with that depending on your style of worship and what kind of instrumentation you're doing. But a little bit of EQ on your streaming output can help clear things up for those listening on any device.
Good deal. So look, we're out of time here. James Wasem's been our guest today. He is audio video expert, obviously. And James, how can people get a hold of you if they have any questions?
Yeah, the best place to do is come over to my website, greatchurchsound.com. And if you've got a question, I've got a contact form there. Certainly get a hold of me. I've got a lot of different resources for folks, including how to set up and do live streaming audio effectively. I've got some free guides for that and all kinds of good stuff. So come on over. Yeah, Great Church Sound's best place.
Yeah, lots of good books too. So you can your book list is on there as well, I'm sure, or people can go to Amazon and see it there as well. All right. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but we'll have to have you on again. We won't wait 4.5 years.
I would appreciate that. Yeah, it's really good to connect with you guys again.
Yeah, we've got questions here we can't get to because of time. So anyhow, James, thank you so much. We sure appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. And Steve, thank you for your input as usual.
I'm glad to be here.
All right. And I'm Phil Thompson. And folks, if you want to get a hold of us, if you have questions for James and you missed all that, you could back up the tape. But if you don't want to, just send us an email, support@streamingchurch.tv. This podcast is brought to you by mychurchdaily.com. I told you about it earlier. So go check it out, mychurchdaily.com, and let us get some feedback from you. All right. Thank you for listening to the Church Solutions podcast, or watching it if you're watching it on YouTube or on our website, streamingchurch.tv. And again, I'm Phil Thompson. Please take care of yourself. We'll catch you again next time on another episode of the Church Solutions podcast.